Greetings, I am Tom Earl. On this week's episode, I interview Sahar Pirzada, Programs and Outreach Manager for Heart.
Yes.
Yes. Greetings, everyone. Welcome to the celebration. As you know, this is my year of courage. We know you could be anywhere, so the fact that you're here today, sharing your greatest gift, your time and attention, means the absolute world to us. Do you agree?
I definitely do agree.
Co-signed by my guest. She goes by the name of Sahar Pirzada. Is this correct?
That is correct, you got it!
Woo! We're off to a good start here, folks. So, Sahar Pirzada is an accomplished public speaker and has extensive experience in coalition building and community outreach. She's the co-founder of
#VigilantLove.
Boom. And before moving to LA, you want to share this part?
Sure, I lived in Singapore for 3 years and I worked at a gender equality advocacy organization that worked to promote gender equitable interpretations of Islam.
Hey, I like this. It's like a team poem.
Yeah.
Okay, but the plot thickens. She is currently the Programs and Outreach Manager for Heart, which is a Muslim-led organization that promotes sexual health and violence awareness in Muslim communities through health education, advocacy, research, and training. Heart believes that individuals of all ages can and do make informed decisions about their sexual health when they have accurate information and systems that foster real choice. Sahar passionately believes Islam is a religion that is sex positive and promotes healthy sexual relationships.
That is true.
How'd I do?
You were on point.
What is it that, a bio can only contain so much, and yet it contains, that was a really rich bio.
Thanks.
What is if you really knew me, you would know.
Oh God, if you really knew me, you would know that I'm also a big Bollywood fan.
Okay, nice.
I watch a lot of Bollywood movies. Like everything that's on Netflix, I've probably seen before. It's also a big way for me to just decompress and take care of myself, especially when I'm unwinding after a long day.
Do you find that's necessary doing the work you do?
Absolutely. I think, when you're working with folks who have experienced trauma, whether it be the trauma of Islamophobia or the trauma of sexual violence or the various ways those intersect, I think I tend to absorb that trauma. So I like to do something that can take my mind off of things. And then also I tend to watch a lot of very sad and emotional films so that I get a good cry in as well.
What's one? That's a recent one that gave you a good cry.
Let's see. I watched this film on Netflix called The Angry Indian Goddesses. And have you heard of this film?
No.
Okay, so I wouldn't say it's actually Bollywood. It's more like independent Hindi film.
Okay.
And it's about these 4 just amazing badass women who come together for a weekend in Goa, and they're just sharing about the various kind of life experiences that they have, and it's very nuanced in the way it talks about how they experience patriarchy. And it ends in a very tragic way, and so I got a good release from that film, and it was unexpected too, so it was a very good release.
I get that from Downton Abbey.
Oh, that works too.
I think I cry every episode, even though this is my 4th time watching it.
That's awesome. This Is Us is also another good
Yes! Oh my God, that's almost too much.
Yeah.
Almost too much tears.
That's when I'm having a really tough day. I'm like, all right, let's bring it.
Do you watch a rerun? The replays of the episodes?
I don't have actual television, so I watch everything on Hulu, and so you can access them anytime.
But do you watch episodes again and again?
No.
Okay.
I don't. I just watch them, I'll save it, I'm okay, I'm just gonna save this until it's one of those days.
Okay.
And I know, during the week I'll have one of those days, so it's not bad. But I'm now I have nothing left to watch. All my shows are off season, so Netflix Bollywood is the main thing.
What about Empire? Do you watch Empire?
I don't.
Okay. Is that still going?
Yeah, my shows are Jane the Virgin.
Okay.
And then This Is Us. Handmaid's Tale I've been watching, and that's been really emotional.
Yeah, it seems really intense. I've read the book, but I haven't gotten into the show yet.
It is so intense, but I'm enjoying it a lot.
Okay.
Especially given the work that I do. And then What else do I watch? Those are the main things. And then I watch like funny stuff like Difficult People, and Last Man on Earth, which got canceled.
Was that good? Did you like that?
It was like stupid funny. So, you know, sometimes you want thoughtless stuff as well.
Do you watch Grownish or Blackish?
You know, I started watching Grownish, and then I actually got really upset when I realized that the Desi guy that's in there is not Desi.
Really?
I was like, for a show that talks about diversity,
Oh
how are you going to have a character that's supposed to be South Asian but then not cast as South Asian? So I was like, I'm not going to watch this.
Is he Latino?
You're Filipino, I think.
Oh,
or something. And I was just like, you can't just categorize Asian. But then he's specifically in the show like a Gujarati boy. And I was like, no! So,
yeah, does seem kind of like a miss.
Yeah, because they pride themselves on being about diversity, and then I'm like, then do diversity right. So, but I appreciate everything else in the film. I mean, in the show, but I can't watch it.
What about Fresh Off the Boat? You like that show?
I watch it on and off.
Okay.
Like that's the one I'll like. You don't have to follow the story; you could just watch it. So I've seen a few episodes here and there, but I don't follow it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Don't worry, folks. We're gonna get to the heart of the content, literally the heart. But this is interesting, you know. And as I gave a disclaimer before, during Ramadan, I find that I go off tangent.
No, it's all good. I clearly do too. So it's all good.
So let's talk about how you mentioned 2 ways you do work: combating Islamophobia or challenging Islamophobia, and talking about sexual health. So what are those organizations that do that?
Yeah, so I am the Programs and Outreach Manager for HEART, and what we do is actually in our acronym, which you mentioned, Health, Education, Advocacy, Research, and Training.
So that's what HEART stands for?
Yes.
I was wondering.
Yeah.
Can we run that back one more time?
So, HEART stands for Health, Education,
Okay.
Advocacy, Research, and Training. So, H-E, Health, Education, Advocacy is A, R is Research, T is Training.
That's dope that it worked out as HEART.
So, yeah, and we've like grown exponentially in the past like 2 years in terms of our programming, to the point where I'm like, I do not have capacity to take on all of the requests, which is a good problem to have.
Yeah. Hashtag nonprofit life.
Yes, seriously.
It's a nonprofit, right?
It is a nonprofit, and we're a national virtual nonprofit. So we don't have a physical office space, and all of our staff members work from home.
Yes,
and
good.
It's also set up that way to make sure that we're being accessible to folks who wear many different hats. So my executive director, Nadia Mahajer, is in Chicago, and then we have Samira Qureshi, who's the director of sexual education and training in Washington, D.C. And then we have Iman Faruqi, who is our communications and development associate, who's newly hired.
Yay, welcome.
Who's in Orange County,
Okay.
and then I'm in LA.
Awesome. Sounds like it's mostly women of color,
Yes.
Muslim women.
Yes.
That's dope.
Yeah, intentionally.
Yeah, talk to me about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the work that we do is for community. And so it's important for us to know that those that are in the organization come from community as well, and have a vested interest in representing the community in a certain way as well. And obviously there's still a long way to go. Like there's no way you could represent the entire Muslim community or work for the entire Muslim community, especially if you're a national organization. But it's something that we've been thinking a lot about. Yeah, especially with the way that kind of Muslims are represented in the media. Oftentimes it isn't fully representative. And so thinking about where are the gaps in representation and how can we work towards actually, when we say representation, we mean it, and we're working towards that.
Have you had a chance to work on a team that's all women led?
I have in Singapore, actually.
Oh, nice.
And it was the best, and so I missed it so much. You know, moving back and working in a more traditional nonprofit, I forgot what it's like to not work with only like a women-led in a women-led space. And so it's been really nice, just having that general understanding of flexibility and needs, and then also feelings of safety to be vulnerable, I think has been the best thing for me in HEART.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's also been my professional experience.
Yeah.
Where I'm usually the only guy.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm sure it's a gift to you. Yeah.
It is. I think it socialized me much different than, you know, that the people who are in charge of my advancing and reward and punishment are women, and usually women of color. And so it's like their values that I have to conform to rather than kind of like a white, male, usually sexist structure that I might have fallen into in a corporate setting.
That is so interesting. I'm like, tell me everything about that. I mean, it's important though, right? To like really think about when you do have women of color in positions of power, it's not just about them. It's about everybody that they're leading as well, and they're shaping everybody's leadership.
Yeah.
And so it's literally changing structures.
I agree.
Yeah. Oh, powerful.
So tell me a little more details. What's your role at Heart?
Okay, so I'm the Programs and Outreach Manager. So I do programming nationwide, and it's mainly in the form of like workshops within the community, whether it be at like a mosque or with an MSA on like a college campus.
Okay.
Or I do like professional development trainings for service providers. So we go into like university settings, work with like social workers, counselors, like rape crisis centers, and train them on what are the nuances when working with Muslim survivors. And this is specifically around more like sexual assault. But yeah, so I do a lot of that programming, and then also community programming, which is not as structured in terms of having like a lecture type workshop, but creating community healing spaces. So I've been working on a series of spaces for the South Asian American community in Los Angeles, talking about rape culture and patriarchy within the South Asian American context, and how does that show up for us, and what does it mean to heal from that?
It's powerful.
Yeah.
So the programs that you do when you go to MSAs and all these different things, and what's MSA?
Oh, Muslim Student Association.
Okay. Is that fee for service, or is that...
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. We get paid for this. And it's for a good reason, because you put a lot of emotional labor into the work that we do, and we're holding space to talk about things that are very difficult to discuss in a safe way. And we know we can't make everyone feel, 100% safe 100% of the time, but we very much try to be trauma informed in the way we create these spaces. Knowing the statistics that are out there, there are likely survivors in our workshops, and we want to make sure that we are centering them in the way that we create the space.
That's powerful.
Yeah, so it is a fee for service. It is very minimal, given what we're trying to do in terms of creating a culture shift for these MSAs.
Yeah.
Workshops at the MSA level or the mosque level, we'll always work with the community we're with, depending on what their financial streams are. It's important for us to get our work out there. So if there is a financial burden where they can't really, raise all of the funds, we usually work something out.
And don't worry, I'll do the plug for you.
Yes.
That's where donors come in, folks. Donors like you.
Give me your money.
What's the website so folks are listening and they want to hop on right now?
So if you go to www.heartwomenandgirls.org, then you can go. There's a donate button. Donate generously. It's Ramadan. Get those good deeds in.
Yes. And speaking of Ramadan, I believe that y'all are also creating conversations around.
Yes.
Ramadan.
So we have a campaign, #MyRamadanIs. And what we're trying to do is really, the month of May is actually also Mental Health Awareness Month. And we're really trying to use this campaign, use this hashtag to promote conversations around how Ramadan is for people, but in reality. Because I think oftentimes we present this image of being on this spiritual high without also talking about what the struggles are for many individuals in the community. I recently experienced a loss, and this Ramadan has been very emotional for me. And it's been difficult to be in community spaces, and when people are so like giddy and high, and they're just like, oh my God, Ramadan is the best. And I'm like, I'm still grieving. I'm still processing something that was very traumatic for me, and I'm not going to pretend like I'm on a spiritual high right now. So my Ramadan is really struggling to just be present and make it through the day. And I don't enjoy fasting because I love food. And so it takes me to a very low place. And so kind of recognizing that. For folks who also, struggle with various mental health issues or have eating disorders, like this month can be very triggering.
Yeah.
And so also trying to create space where people can talk about that and not feel ashamed of the way that they're impacted by this month.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How do you think, tell me if this is too personal, how do you think that those of us who care about you or people like you who might be going that, how might we be more conscious of our language, or how can we show up as somebody who supports you?
Yeah, I mean, I think a big part of it is shifting the culture around what Ramadan is. I think oftentimes people assume that people are fasting, and that might not be the case. So there's also shame associated with not fasting, whether it be that you're on your period, like I am right now, like I'm not fasting. So, not having to pretend that you are is one thing. So kind of removing that stigma and normalizing the fact that there are many different reasons for why people might not be fasting throughout the month. So instead of being like, how is your fast going or how is your rosa going is what I hear a lot in the like Urdu context. How is your Ramadan going is a little bit more general, right? And then also if you're asking the question, be genuine about it. And don't just assume that the answer is going to be, it's great, I love Ramadan, right? Like if you're asking the question, be prepared for what the answer might be. That's always been a big thing for me, is like if I am asking somebody something, like I want to be able to be in the mental space to hold space for them as well, depending on what's on the other side of that question. I think another thing that people can do to support those this Ramadan is, normalize talking about the difficulties, right? And not in a way where it's like, oh, we're all just like in this slump, but normalize it so that you also can offer space on what does work for you in terms of your spiritual health. So for me, sometimes going to the mosque doesn't always do it, but sometimes I like reading Quran just by myself. Yeah. Right? So I don't want to be shamed into like, well, you didn't go for like Tarawih prayers like every single night of this month, right? But like I do what I do like for myself, right? I'm not answerable to anybody but God. So normalizing the various ways that people practice, however they practice, and I think those are some kind of concrete ways that I think we can shift the culture around how people express what Ramadan is to them.
It's powerful. Yeah, I think you're highlighting for me that we don't fall into the I need to do something to be worthy. So I need to go to the mosque, or I need to pray the night prayers, or I need to fast even to therefore be worthy, whereas we're just being ourselves. We're loved by God and worthy. Absolutely.
And that should be kind of the norm for the community as well. I think there's a lot of, it's almost like the Olympics, right? Like in Ramadan, people are like, yes, let's like get this. And I'm like always so amazed and like, I admire those that can do that, but I also admire those who can be real about where they're at. So, wherever you're at this Ramadan, like we welcome you, we love you, and use the hashtag #MyRamadan is to share with us what your Ramadan really is this month.
How do we, so we're talking about ritual. I think that fasting is a ritual. So is prayer, so is reading scripture. How do we, as people who believe that there's a higher being, continue to nurture that relationship without falling into ritual being this like outward thing?
Ooh, that's hard in the age of social media.
Let me be specific then. How do you?
How do I? I feel like even by saying it, I'm putting it into the public sphere. So I'd rather not talk about what my personal rituals are in terms of maintaining my spiritual health. But I will say that whenever you go through a trauma, it does change your relationship to God and sometimes to religion itself. And I think it's been helpful for me to be able to process that with people that truly love me. And kind of also know that whenever I'm ready to step back into particular rituals, like God will be there to welcome me. So I mean, one of the acronyms we use consistently in Heart is Rahma. Like this idea of mercy and compassion really being at the core of what we do and how we do what we do. And I believe that is such a strong and, you know, important characteristic of Allah. And so for the higher being that I believe in, I believe that, you know, they shower us with their rahmah. And so they'll be ready for me in whatever way I show up for them.
I mean,
yeah.
So much self-judgment gets placed on people, I think, when you enter religion.
Yes.
That's one of the dangers of personifying God as this, like, with a lever of you're good today or you're bad today.
Yeah. I mean, that's, we deal a lot with that at Heart, especially when you're talking about taboo topics like sex and sexual violence, right?
Yeah.
There's so much stigma and shame associated with even mentioning those things.
Yeah.
And so if, you know, if you are associating those things with I know I grew up with the association of sex is not something that you should be talking about or doing.
Yeah.
So there was like a shame and a guilt associated with it. And, you know, so when I had questions, once I became sexually active, I was like, who do I go to talk about this? Because isn't it shameful to discuss it, even though it had to do with my health?
Yes.
And so, you know, I think it takes a lot of unconditioning and just relearning and building new associations, and those associations being reinforced by the community you're in to really change, again, like the culture around these things. Yeah.
So before we start going into details of patriarchy and rape culture, what has been your journey of being able to, you know, recognize that this is the way we're socialized, I no longer believe this, and kind of what you started to allude to?
My journey, you know, into this work is really based off of my lived experiences. Being a Muslim woman, I went to an Islamic school from 2nd to 8th grade. And the only messages I got around sex were that it's bad, and that, like, we had sex ed in, like, 8th grade or 7th grade, and the only thing we were told is, like, you can't have sex when you're on your period. Like, no conversation around consent, or, I mean, it was...
What was the reason that they said?
They didn't give a reason either. Like, it was just like a one-liner thrown in there, and we were like, okay, cool.
Then they closed the book.
Yeah, right? And
oh my gosh.
And, you know, it was segregated, and I think that I do believe that they probably had intentions to make it a comfortable conversation, but then it wasn't. And I don't think I don't remember a single person asking any questions, or us doing any activities around it. It was very much a lecture-based, like, you know, the teacher was in power in terms of presenting the narrative, and that was it. And then going into high school, there was no, again, we had like maybe a week where we had like an external facilitator come in and talk to us, and it was all about like reproduction. And then there were very scary pictures of genitalia, and that was it. And again, at that stage in my life, that wasn't something that was necessarily on my mind, and so I also just disregarded the information. And I was like, I don't need this right now. And then when I got older, I realized I'm so not prepared, and I don't have any resources. I don't know where to turn to like get information so that I can make informed choices. And I remember just like waiting for somebody to talk to me and like create that space where I could ask questions, and that space was never created for me. And then, you know, I remember just like Googling things, and that's never a good idea because you never know what's going to pop up.
Never a good idea?
I mean, for me, it didn't work out. And I was like, I felt very like, okay, well, this, like, WebMD is never... I just always feel like you just end up being like, oh, I have like a life-threatening disease.
Yes.
So, yeah, and I remember like going and talking to my gynecologist about some health issues that I was experiencing, and they kind of just like disregarded the pain that I was feeling, and and the issues that I was having, and I was like, is this normal? Like, where do I get answers? And then it was once I started working for the health organization, the gender equality organization in Singapore.
Yeah.
And I was the training executive there. And so my job was to actually conduct sex ed workshops. And I was like, oh. And then I was introduced to all these amazing resources.
Yeah.
And I put together a curriculum of basically what I wish I had when I was growing up. And in it talked a lot about healthy relationships and consent and really just like debunking certain myths, and then just honestly creating a lot of space for discussion. Like, what are your fears around this? What have your experiences been? And then starting with like kind of like a no assumptions. Like, we didn't have assumptions about whether folks in the room were sexually active or not, but whatever it is, like, and whatever feels comfortable for you, you could submit questions anonymously. We just wanted to make sure that the information was getting out there so that people can make informed choices. So that was a great learning process for me. Of like being able to access resources through building a curriculum myself.
Through having to teach it. One of the best learning experiences.
It is. And like when I moved back to the US.
And if I could just ask, how old are you at this point?
22.
22. Okay.
Yeah.
That's about when I started to learn about these things too.
That's kind of late.
It's very late.
Yeah, I'm like, that's ridiculous.
A lot of damage has kind of been caused by that point for self and others.
Yeah, so it was late, folks. Like, if you're watching this and you're in a similar position, come talk to me. I'll hook you up with some resources.
How can they do that?
You can email me. Facebook message sometimes work. I'm not very consistent with checking. I realize people use Facebook Messenger for everything now, and I'm like, oh, I should check this more often. And then don't try to add me on Instagram, because if I don't know you, I won't add you. But Facebook Messenger email is probably the best.
Okay.
Yeah.
And we'll have in the show notes her email. Don't worry.
Yeah.
Okay, so you were coming back to the U.S. after Singapore.
So while I was in Singapore, we got this really cool grant to work on gender equitable interpretations of Islam, and I was working with the Muslim community in Singapore.
Okay.
And doing very similar workshops. Like, we would do sex ed workshops on sexual and reproductive rights. Like, very basic things, like you have the right to say no, and like which is unfortunately not that basic. You really do have to say it in order for it to be heard.
Even here in the United States.
Even here. Everywhere. Whether you're Muslim or not. And I was like studying with some scholars out there as well on understanding Islam through a gender equitable lens. And that was very like, it was almost like a coming home into my body, right? Of just like, I had very feminist ideals, and I also grew up with a specific interpretation of Islam, and I didn't always have answers for how those came together. And being able to study about Islam through that lens, it really it honed it in for me that like, all right, this truly is what I believe, and I felt so blessed to like finally come back home. And
could you share with us some aha moments that had you feeling like you arrived home?
Yeah, let me think. There were so many. Just like the way that we talked about verses about polygamy, or verses about consent within marriage. Like, when they were revealed with a certain context, and how oftentimes that context is completely lost and just like not even referred to. And how people use it, oftentimes taking it out of context to oppress others. And so my mind was blown by so many verses as well as ahadith that were shared, and once the context was given, I was like, that makes so much more sense. Like, just the very basics of like, Islam, I believe, is a religion that was used to free people from oppression. So if anything is being used to oppress someone that is marginalized, that is our flaw in how we're using it and our interpretation of it. So as someone who strongly believes in a lot of social justice values, like it just needed to make sense for me. So
I love that compass.
Yeah, alhamdulillah. Like, and I mean, it's a lifelong struggle, right? Like you still come across things where you're like, oh, that doesn't sit right with me.
Exactly.
Like, what's going on here? But having actual spaces where I could talk about it and not feel like shamed into like, well, you just have to believe, right? It's like, actually, like I really do need to understand it.
Yes.
So, and that being okay, that being normalized, that everybody has questions, and that's part of strengthening your faith.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To give context to some people listening who might not be Muslim,
Right.
I was at a Muslim event and they had me perform poetry, and I added a line just for that event that said, if basically if your wife says no and you still have sex with her, that's rape. And a guy came out to me, and he was the son of the imam, so he was in training to become the imam, and he told me, I loved your poem, but that line is incorrect, that it's not rape, that if she's your wife, she can't say no. And his wife was next to him with her stroller, and I was like...
I mean, that's horrifying, right? Because it's just like, I mean, my mind constantly went to, okay, like, should we talk to the wife?
Yeah, and you know, it's one of those situations where...
It's sensitive.
Well, and he found someone overseas who, like, is very new to the country, doesn't know anyone but him and his family. And, you know, like, he did it on purpose.
Yeah, no, it's, right, because when it comes to sexual violence, oftentimes it's not about the sex, it's about power and control. You're going to do whatever is in your power to maintain that control.
Can you run that back?
Yes.
For the folks who... Because that's a misconception. That's like about sexiness and I desire you because of what you're wearing. Yeah. But it's not about that.
Sexual violence, and I can repeat this over and over again for you. However many times you need to hear it, I will stand in front of you and say it to your face over and over again. Sexual violence is not about sex. It is not about desire and this attraction. It is about power and control. Okay, so a person can be fully clothed from head to toe or wearing nothing at all, and it's never, one, an excuse, depending on how the person's dressed. But two, also, we need to understand that when it comes to sexual violence, those things don't matter, right? Like, it's literally about the person exerting their power and their sense of control over the other person. So, you know, it's, I think that's one of the biggest things that people try to, like, make sense of. But you're trying to make sense of something that isn't there.
Yes.
So, yes.
It's like when you're trying to say, I can't believe that person did that. And it's you can't believe it because you would never do it.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, the messages that we get about sex, especially in the context of marriage, it's almost like in the context of Muslim marriages, people think that by signing the nikah contract, that is your consent. And it's like, no.
Which is the marriage contract in Islam, right? For those
so the marriage contract in Islam, like just by signing that, people sometimes think that is the consent itself. But you still need to ask every single time. You still need to be checking in with your partner every single time. And I think that's also a part of practicing what are the values of our faith, of, you know, compassion, again, like mercy, right? Like love, like those should be at the center of your relationship, sex being a part of it. It doesn't logically make sense to me that you would want to bring harm to someone that you love and that you're in a relationship with. And so if they're feeling harmed or uncomfortable or are not enjoying a certain experience of sex, like that is a big deal.
Yes.
Like we should be talking about it, and we should be also understanding that you have a responsibility to be checking in with your partner. And if you don't have the language to have those conversations, that's why we have professionals. You know, go and see a marriage counselor or a sex therapist. Try to figure out what it is, where is that disconnect happening, that someone feels maybe unsafe or maybe is not into it or is not enjoying it, or feels obliged to say yes as a given, right? Like that shouldn't be the norm. So yeah.
Yes, so now we've started to talk about rape culture and consent. And we've had conversations, a lot of folks might have listened to our episode with Marine, which is a very good one. And one thing I brought up is I started to do maybe around the age of 23, workshops with men and young boys and young teens about consent. And time after time, I find similar to what I believed when I was a teen, that, for instance, if she says yes once, it's consent all along. If she said yes to your friends, it's consent. So I think what's really helpful is for people who are listening now, that maybe this is going to be one of the only times they do listen for a while. What are some misconceptions, or what are some things people should know about consent?
Okay, so consent is to give permission to do a specific act at a specific time, and it is ongoing, right? So someone can give consent to kissing. That doesn't mean that they're consenting to any other action. They can also revoke that consent at any given point. And there's an analogy that is, and there's also certain things that can actually, legally even, like prevent consent from even being given, right? So if there is a power differential in terms of age, so if the person that you're getting consent from is a minor, legally their consent under the law doesn't count. So if you're, an adult of an adult age and you're getting consent from a minor, that won't fly. If there's a power differential in terms of the relationship that you have, being someone who is a superior, like, I'm a teacher, getting consent from a student, that also doesn't fly.
Even if you're the same age?
Even if you're the same age. If the relationship is such that you are the teacher and that person is your student, that means you have power over that person as their teacher.
To say they pass or fail or move on.
And so the consent that they're giving you is still conditional. They might be giving consent because they feel like if they say no, maybe you're going to fail them, right? But regardless of that, there are certain professional codes that prevent you from actually engaging in those kinds of relations.
Like a supervisor.
Like in the context of like a corporate environment, of like a boss with a, I don't know corporate words, a boss with an employee. And then, there's also issues around consent when the person is intoxicated to the point where they're not understanding what they're giving consent to. So that's also, I think, a big one that people need to understand. That if the person that you're getting consent from is intoxicated to the point where they don't actually understand what they're giving consent to, that consent is no longer valid. It doesn't have to get to the point where they're unconscious. But rewinding, I forgot what the other question was about consent.
Well, you nailed it. So misconceptions and so then here's the thing. So I shared that with the class, and especially that last one, the drinking thing, and all the young men, and I myself, when I was their age, would have also said this, we've all been taught that, if you get her drunk, it's like loosens everybody up. So why is it that, myself included, generation after generation, we all somehow have this knowledge as fact, and we're all in agreement until someone like me or you comes and says, actually, that's rape. Why? What is it that continues to...
I think the messages that we get, right, from mainstream society promote rape culture. It's an entire culture where these things are normalized. It's an entire culture where rape is normalized, and that's the core of it. You're not going to have people changing their mindsets until we have a very strong culture shift. And I think, it's multi-tiered, but I think it starts from a very young age of teaching young folks about boundaries, about their own bodies, about respecting other people's bodies, and normalizing that, right? From a young age, we need to be shifting the culture around consent, and naming when it is rape, because I think that is powerful. And it's scary at the same time, right? Like, it's scary to recognize when you are perpetuating rape culture, and that's like, it's like the whole thing when you call someone a racist and they're like, I'm not racist, and it's like, okay, you saying it doesn't change the fact that you are. So telling folks that their behaviors or their actions are a part of promoting rape culture, it almost gives them a sense of like guilt, right? And accountability. Now, with things around race, if you have a sense of guilt and accountability, what do you do with that, right? That also may mean that you have power in this instance. So what are you going to do with that power? That power is responsibility. You got to shift it. You got to use it in a particular way to change the conversation, to change the culture. So that's, hopefully that makes sense to you all.
Yeah, and I try to, in workshops I facilitate, go first to create space for people to be comfortable. So I can say I absolutely, for the first 23 years of my life, was perpetuating racism, sexism, homophobia, and definitely rape culture. And that's the thing, when I hear these young kids say, read exercises where people identify as male are on one side and people who identify as women are on the other side, and you do, like, have you ever done one of these where it's stand up if this has ever happened?
Yes.
And they do that, and all the young men are crying because we realize all the pain and trauma and bullshit we've caused. And I'm like, when I was your age, I was doing this same stuff, but I didn't get an intervention until like 24. And it's no excuse, but I definitely know that I have done that, and so I hope the men listening who also are doing that, because I know without intervention, I'd have become a supervisor, a mentor, a boss, who would have then perpetuated it with even more power.
Yeah, and I mean, if that power is, again, never challenged, right? Like, when we think about power also, I think it's such an interesting thing in the world of gender-based violence to talk about power. Because I think power outside of that, like, I always have to switch hats, because when I'm doing my organizing work around Islamophobia, power, you're trying to build power. Yeah. Right? And it's seen as like there's a positive correlation to it.
Like empowerment.
Right? Yeah. Like, oh, I want to be empowered.
Yeah.
In the world of gender-based violence, power has a very scary connotation to it, because it's usually in the context of power and control, related directly to rape culture and rape. So, like, when I think about, okay, when people are in position of power, even, like, that is still something so scary to me, because I can't always divorce it, and I don't want to, because for me it's like, okay, well, if you're in that position, that means something, and that means that you also have a huge responsibility to use that position wisely. And I think of, in the prophetic tradition for the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, like, I think about how he used his position of power in various ways, and it was never seen as this thing that, I'm just going to abuse it. It was seen as this very, very delicate thing that you need to handle with so much care, because you're going to be held responsible for how you use it. Like, you got to think about every single action, because you will be held responsible. So, and all the people who you hold power over, you're accountable to them as well. So, shifting the way we think about things, hopefully.
Yeah, and this is going to be an obvious question, but just, I know but asking it so other people can hear us talking about it. But I know for me, when we were young, and just being totally honest, and people who are still old and still have these beliefs, that a lot of it is that we literally thought that we knew better than women. And so it's like, what do you mean no? Like, I know better than you what you want. And so why is it that, once again, generation after generation, from a young age, we were 12, 13, 14, and then we would have adults coach us on if anything, trouble did come up. Like, here's what you should do, here's what you should say. What? And these are like mentors, brothers, teachers, all these people, coaches, participating in. Where does this come from, of men thinking they have this right to women's bodies and we know better than women?
I don't know. I mean, okay, like, again, it comes back to culture, right? Like, but it's also, again, it comes back to power. Like, if you're in a position of power, you want to maintain that power. So that means those that are in similar positions, you want to make sure they have their power too. But it's also entitlement. Like, if the messages that you get from watching movies and from seeing people who are elected officials and all of this, like, give you those messages that this is actually something that you do have rights to, right? Like, and it's convenient for you, and it's something where, again, it's something that you would want, then, like, why would you give that up? right? Like, there has to be some other reason for you to be like, if you're never held accountable for your actions and you're constantly told and reinforced these messages that like, this is okay, right? This is okay, what you're doing is fine, this is just part of how society works, nothing's going to happen to you, and nothing does happen to you. You don't get to see the hurt that you've caused, or it's convenient enough for you to erase it or not see it even when it is visible. If you believe this is like a divine thing that you're given, those are all just justifications for you, right? To keep going the way you're going. If you're never challenged, if your power is never challenged, if you're never held accountable, if you're never told anything otherwise, then why would you change? So, again, it's going to take all of us to shift this culture. And it's going to take all of us to also recognize, like, everybody has a role.
Yes.
Hopefully you're attuned to what that role is and the power that you have to shift the culture. Yeah.
Because for me, once all those things that you just named happened, you know, the seeing the pain, the accountability, the people challenging you, like I talked about, now I'm in an environment where everybody's women and we're having these conversations that I felt like for the first time I had a choice to be different.
It was like normalized being on the other side of things.
It didn't even feel like we were holding on to power. It just felt like we were breathing.
Yeah. Oh, that's beautiful.
And that's what sexism and racism and patriarchy is, that it's as natural as air.
Yeah. Yeah. That is, I mean, hopefully, I hope everybody can breathe, you know, like, I want us to be able to challenge all of these things to feel like breathing. It feels like that for me sometimes. I'm very spoiled because I'm surrounded by like amazing mentors and activists and folks who are usually on the same page. So, but sometimes I get reminded of like, oh no, there's so much work to do.
Well, and now I think you're talking when you say I want it to be like breathing to challenge it. I think we're talking about that's actually what love is.
Yes!
And that's actually what a real relationship is.
It is.
When it's not based upon dominance and submission and that's, I think, of all of the love I've experienced that I never would have if I remained the white, straight male that I was socialized to be.
Yeah. Wow. That's awesome. I want to know more about that. That's what I want to know more about. Like your transformation.
Like which part?
I guess coming to the point of feeling like it's breathing, right? Like that transformation over time. What were milestones in that transformation, if any?
Punk rock had a lot to do with a lot of wakening up.
Really? That's awesome.
You know, for me, when I was in high school, I was starting to get into anti-racism work and anti-classism work. And so this is why I hadn't heard of intersectionality yet.
This was in high school?
Yeah, high school. So I, at the same time, was super friendly, was the nicest person to everyone in school, and like was homecoming king while at the same time being this punk sort of outcast, like still was loved by people, fighting racism, but didn't have the intersectional piece, because at the same time, behind all of that, I considered that I was a misogynist at that time. That I had thought all these things that really, in the end, I know better than women. You know, where they say trust women's voices. I didn't have any of that component yet. I knew like women should have equal pay and these things. And that's why when you see these really nice guys who seem like they're doing activisty stuff, getting Me Too, calling them out, I 100% do believe it because I was that. And I have tons of friends who are that, but I was in high school. You know what I mean?
That's, yeah.
It's not an excuse, but there's some understanding because you're little, but the damage is real to the person, the people who were impacted by my negativity. They're not thinking, well, I was in high school, it doesn't hurt as much now than it did then. It does. And so that's that never letting myself off the hook. But then when I was around 2021, my major was Africology. So I learned about Black feminism. And through that, learned about...
Africology, okay.
It's like, some places call it Black Studies,
okay.
Some call it Africana Studies.
Okay.
And so we were studying like Audre Lorde, Angela Davis, and you know, to like get a degree, I had to articulate queer theory, Black feminist thought. That was now the structure of, instead of, you know, Christopher Columbus founded America. Like, instead of passing being that, it was being able to say, like, actually, here's the historical impact.
Yeah.
And then it was working at a nonprofit as well called Community Tampa Bay, where we worked with high school students to end all forms of discrimination.
Wow.
And I was surrounded by all women who, and some men who were like, let me get the door for you. Like, let's break that down before I walk in front of you. What does chivalry mean to you?
Yeah.
And I'm like, what do you mean? Isn't that what guys are supposed to? It's like, yeah, but is it required? Do you think you're more important than me?
Yeah.
And I'm like, and then Jessica Valenti, I read her book, The Purity Myth.
Okay.
And all of these things about, you know, like sex means you're pure, and if you stay a virgin, you're more pure, and how worthiness is associated with what mostly women do with their vaginas. Then I started to learn that, like, you don't have to have a vagina to be a woman. You don't have to have a penis to be a man. Like, so, you know, it's just one thing after the other. And like you said, I would see the impact of my work by seeing it in the young people's reaction. And I'd have people who cared enough for me that would put up with my bullshit. Where I'd be like, I don't know, I feel like chivalry is kind of a good thing. To be like, this motherfucker. I love you enough to sit with you through this.
Yes.
But I owned it quickly.
That's good.
That's one thing I'm grateful for, is that when you're like, hey, this thing you said to me was racist or sexist or fucked up. And I'm not like, whoa. Like, I'm like, great, now I can, moving forward, not be an asshole again.
That's so important.
Yes.
It's so important. Oh man. Yeah, no, that's that's growth, right?
That's growth.
Yeah.
That's a snapshot. That's the elevator speech of the transformation.
It's a great elevator pitch. Yeah. That's awesome. Yeah, I'm just gonna sit with that for a little bit. I mean, it's great that you had that network in that space, right? Because I think I haven't always felt comfortable calling out people I love on their sexism or racism, because that takes a lot of emotional labor also to like walk someone through that.
Yes, it does.
So, but when I have done it and when it's shown, when I've seen the impact of that labor, it's been awesome. And I appreciate that, and I'm so grateful for when people have done that for me as well.
Yes.
So, yeah, I just hope people get paid for that kind of work.
Well, a lot of them were, so.
Yeah.
What keeps you hopeful and believing that? Because a lot of this conversation, I've even seen the reaction that I've given is like, oh, you know, it can be heavy when we think about the systems that, you know, they're in play, and how young it starts, and how vicious when you actually name the psychology of a white supremacist capitalist patriarchy.
Yeah.
So what keeps you hopeful that
keeps me hopeful?
We can do this? We can create a world free from discrimination.
It shouldn't take me that long to think about it. But
No, it's that big of a question. That
it is. You know, I think just seeing the actual shift in front of us is what keeps me hopeful. The work that we're doing right now is work that didn't exist when I was young. I'm not that old, so the fact that just in a short amount of time we're already seeing shifts, it's really, that is what is inspiring. And I think that there is hope for those who are also, like, I look to my elders and I see how much joy and pride and love they have for the work we're doing today. And that is like, it's validating to see that it's not just like, oh, like one generation that is being inspired or impacted by this, but it's intergenerationally we're seeing the impact.
Yes.
And that gives me hope.
That's
that
wonderful.
The work, you know, this work is also not just about the few of us, right? Yeah. This work is needed, so it'll happen whether it's us or somebody else doing it. And it's just a matter of making sure that it's resourced and that the people that are leading it are also thinking about it in intersectional ways. It takes a lot of time. So we're also just like letting that time come, right? It's not like the work you do today, you're gonna see the impact also tomorrow morning. It might take a while, but in the 2 years that I've even been here, I've seen huge transformations in the communities I've worked with. And That's awesome. That's, I think, what keeps me hopeful.
That's wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there's so much that we didn't get a chance to cover.
I was like, I didn't even talk about
Vigilant
the other
mom?
job that I have. But heart is, there's enough to cover with just one. So
We'll have to do a part 2 to bring you back to talk about
that sounds great.
Islamophobia.
Yeah.
There's one thing that around heart that I just want to see if you wanted to speak on. We talked a lot about consent and rape culture. Is there anything you want to talk about, though, around people who understand consent but still want to have healthy sex?
Yeah. Have it. Do it.
Is there any, sex ed best practices?
Sex ed best practices.
We've already talked about how most of us, I went to a Catholic school, even people who went to public schools, most of the time we never get sex ed.
You can have sex. Have it. You can have sex for pleasure. You can have sex for other reasons. Have it, especially if you're having it in a way that makes you feel good, makes your partner feel good, partners feel good. Make sure you're also being healthy and safe about the choices you make. So get regularly checked out, get tested, and think about particular risks that might be involved and how you can mitigate those risks. If you need resources, we have a ton on our website. Also happy to chat with you if you have any particular questions. We have an online virtual educator platform if that feels more comfortable for you. Or even if you feel like DMing us on Instagram, we check all of that. So just know that if you ever do come across an instance where you don't feel safe or you don't feel like you're practicing in a way that makes you feel good, there are options, and we're happy to walk you through what those are.
Wonderful. And let's clarify that BS that your teacher taught you. Can people have sex on their period?
It depends on what school of thought you follow.
Okay.
So some say no, but the reasoning that they give is because it might be painful but I've also heard a lot about how it's really healthy for you to have sex when you're on your period. So I think whatever makes you feel good, but there are resources one way or the other. Permissibility is not as important, I think, as your health and what makes you feel safe and comfortable. So, but let's take away this idea that it's like a purity issue. It's more about health and wellness. So yeah,
your period doesn't make you dirty or disgusting or unworthy. So if your partner doesn't want to have sex with you because they think periods are gross,
we need to do some work there.
Tell that person
they wouldn't exist if it weren't for periods.
Exactly.
So,
tell them to go fuck themselves. We can swear on this podcast. I don't know if you put that together.
That's great.
So you talked about the power of choice, and you said, I believe that Islam is sex positive.
Yes.
And the power of choice.
Yes.
So why don't we just talk about that, and then we'll wrap up.
So Islam, I do believe, is a sex positive religion, right? In terms of the various reasons for why you can have sex, you're not also just supposed to have sex to reproduce, right? You can have sex for pleasure, and that's seen as something that is positive.
Yeah.
So just in that, for me, that makes me feel like Islam is a sex positive religion. The messages that we get around sex are not always positive though, especially when there's a lot of shame that's associated with activity, both within and beyond marriage. These are personal choices that people make, and nobody should be shamed for the choices they make. That said, there are certain barriers that people have to be able to make informed choices.
Yeah.
There are certain structures that we're up against that prevent us from making the choices that we want to make.
Yeah.
For example, when it comes to reproductive rights in the United States, there are many, many states where getting a termination, having an abortion, having access to birth control, basic birth control, just oral contraceptives, those are not made accessible. So then you're restricting also the choices people can make about how they want to engage in sexual activity. So hopefully people are also taking into account that when people make choices about how they want to engage in sexual activity, it's not always up to them. Because you have these structures, these powerful structures coming from the government and other institutions that restrict our choice. So I do believe that when people have options, they can make informed choices, but unfortunately, we're still battling to make sure that they have those options.
Yes. I feel like that's an excellent nuance of the power of choice. And that's powerful.
Yeah.
Appreciate that.
Yeah.
I think for me, we've mentioned it in the episode with Emerine, one of the healthy, or the most important things, or most helpful things was enthusiastic consent.
Yes! Enthusiastic consent.
You want to talk about it?
I mean, it's, I think, pretty self-explanatory. Like, right, you have to have enthusiastic consent where there's no shred of doubt, right?
Yeah.
Like, the person's like, yeah, sure, right? That's not really enthusiastic. You want to make sure it's enthusiastic. But I also think that it's a learned practice of also for folks who might want to give an enthusiastic yes, but I've been conditioned to believe that there's shame associated with taking pleasure in sexual activity. So there's a lot of work to be done on all sides of it. But yeah.
In other words, if you wear someone down, please, come on, all good, and then they finally say yes, that is not enthusiastic consent. You wore them down like a jerk. Or, a rapist.
Yeah,
so,
don't do that. So...
Okay, word. High five.
All right.
This has been dope. So we conclude with this.
Okay.
This is my year of courage.
Yay!
And so the reason I'm doing that is because I think there's a misconception that courage only applies to people who run into burning buildings. And that is courage. Like, go firefighters. You know what I mean? But it's also an everyday thing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think it takes courage to say yes or no in terms of sexual activity. It takes courage to ask when you're not conditioned to ask. It takes courage to change an entire culture that we've been conditioned to accept as the norm. So I hope you all will join us in practicing this courage.
I hear you on that. What is courage to you specifically?
Courage is, all the things I just mentioned, but also, for myself, it's being honest about where I am in this journey. Because I don't think I'm 100% there where I'm like, everything is unconditioned and I am 100% like on board with everything, right? Conceptually, I might be. In practice, I'm not always. And so, for me, courage is recognizing and being honest where I am with my own journey and giving myself permission to take my time to get where I need to be.
I love that and I resonate with that. Yeah. And want to add, I hope I haven't given the impression that I believe I've arrived either.
Okay.
And we're all, like people say, I'm an aspiring ally. So it's a constant, you're only as good as your last at bat kind of a situation.
Yes, absolutely.
Do you have any courage role models?
Courage role models, so many. Well, one of my best friends, Tracy, I gain a lot of courage from her because we talk a lot about kind of everything. But especially where we are emotionally, physically, and mentally, with our health, within our relationships, professionally. So I take a lot of courage from her because she helps to create a space where I can be vulnerable and have those conversations with myself. My therapist. And then I think for me, Heart as an organization and the people that I work with in the organization, whether it be my other staff members or my trainers or the volunteers, or the community members that I have come to know, there's so many in that community that I believe are my courage role models. And I would say especially my executive director, Nadia, she started this organization when these conversations were not happening in the same way. And she's built something from the ground up that I'm so proud to be a part of. But I only find courage to do this work in the way that I do without any barriers, like just feeling full control and agency over doing what I need to do because she's created that kind of space for us. So I get courage from her and also admire the way that she practices her courage.
It's wonderful.
Yes.
Last courage question.
Okay.
What awaits somebody at the end of that journey, or what's the reward for living a life of courage?
Ooh, what? The reward for living a life of courage? let you know when I get there. Well, the moments when I've felt like I've practiced courage and had some difficult conversations and just like the everyday type of courage, I've felt like I can breathe, like what you mentioned.
Yeah.
Right? I think it's a part of growth. And so your reward is growth, but your reward is that release. Right? And to be able to breathe again in that same way, I think that is your reward.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Another high five.
Yeah.
Is there anything that we missed that you wanted to? I know there are a lot of things we want to talk about, but anything within the context of this interview?
Stuff, no. Follow us on social media, and use the hashtag MyRamadan to let us know how your Ramadan is going. Share with us what your struggles are, what your high points are, what your low points are, what your norm is, and just know that you are never alone. We're always here for you, whatever part of the journey you're in. So, yeah.
Yes, indeed. We'll have all the social media links below. Here's my invitation to the celebration audience. I'm really about encouraging people to become monthly donors to, 1 to 3 organizations you really care about. Really think, when you think of financial literacy, planning your giving is a really important thing to do. So I encourage, instead of randomly, when you feel inspired, donating $50 here, $10 here, pick 3 organizations, decide I'm going to give $300 this year, and then give $10 a month to those 3. And so I'd like to encourage, let's see if we can get 10 people to, even if it's $1 a month, to go on to Heart's website and, just $1 a month or $5 a month, $10 a month. It goes a long way. And not only that, it's just really helpful for the executive director to then go out and fundraise, to be able to say, we have a large contingency of monthly donors, and to be able to just share that with them. So show that support. If you could, go online, donate $1 a month, $5 a month. It'd mean a lot to them. And it'd be awesome to show that, you being here really had an impact. It'll look good for her when she goes to work on Monday.
Yeah. Nonprofit life, it's like every day. But thank you. I would appreciate anything. And also keep us in your prayers, your good thoughts, your positive energy. Please send it our way so that we can continue to do this work.
Yes. Show notes, tomworld.com/SAHAR, tomworld.com/SAHAR. Sound good?
Sound good.
Last question for you. I'd like you to have the last word, but first of all, I want to thank you so much for, showing up, being courageous.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, and having this conversation with us. And, a lot of things that we talked about don't get talked about, especially in the context of our community between male identifying, women identifying, Muslim guy and women, unsupervised. And then we just normalize having these conversations. And
Absolutely.
I know the lives that you're changing and the people hearing this, and for all the awesomeness that you put in the world.
Thank you.
And even the conversations about Ramadan.
Yeah.
It's so wonderful.
Yeah.
So really appreciate the heck out of that.
Well, thank you for having me and for creating this space for so many people to also be a part of these conversations. I think social media is such a powerful tool.
Yeah.
And to be able to use it to have these, again, culture shifting kind of conversations is awesome. So thank you for having us, and we hope to continue to build with you all. So let's keep the conversation going. Hopefully this is just the beginning.
Agreed. And so on that note, I like the guest to always have the last word. So what would you like to invite the audience to consider, to do, to reflect upon, to be? What's your invitation to the celebration audience?
Oh, I think I gave a few, but I'm going to sum them up again. So 1, practice your courage by thinking about how you're normalizing rape culture and the power you have to shift it. So I invite you to have that conversation with yourself and practice courage to shift it where you can. I invite you to also hashtag MyRamadan be honest about where you're at this Ramadan, and however it is that you're practicing, even if you aren't Muslim, if you engage in other forms of spiritual fasting, maybe think about what that means for you. And then I think the last thing I'm going to invite folks to do is to remember to breathe. I think breathing is so beautiful, and oftentimes there's certain things that restrict our breath. So think about what those things are that you need to work through so that you can breathe fully.
Thank you. There it is. Give her a shout out on social, screenshot this, post it, tell a friend to listen to it, anything like that to continue the conversation, show us love. Any questions you have, hit us both up, show notes. And my friends, once again, we want to thank you so much for your time, for your attention, for your love, for your encouragement. And as always, we're wishing you peace and blessings. Greetings, Tom Earl here. You see, Sahar and I thought that was the end of the episode, but then we started to debrief and kind of talk through it, and the conversation that came up from that was so rich and exciting that we decided after talking about it, let's share this with people so they can hear what we talked about. And so in a second here, you're going to get a behind-the-scenes look at sort of how conversations go with guests afterwards, where we debrief it and I see if there's anything they want me to edit out or if there's anything like that. Because I always share with people, be vulnerable, be brave, go for it, and afterwards I'll never publish something that you don't want. So you don't have to worry about while we're recording, holding back. Go for it, be brave, be vulnerable, and then let's debrief afterwards. So with Sahar's permission, I really thought that people would benefit from getting to hear the conversation we have. And so we sit down and we debrief, and then we start to talk more about the conversations we had, and we start to talk a little bit more about feminism and all these kind of things. And we both had a phone conversation and said, let's share this with the audience. And so in a second, I'm going to get out of the way. You're going to get to hear that behind the scenes. And so it's unedited, and it's really us being vulnerable and just debriefing together without the intention of even in that moment knowing we were going to share it. So, have some love and compassion and empathy while listening to it. And of course, let us know what you think of adding in this kind of bonus afterwards section. Okay, I'm going to get out of the way now. Peace and blessings.
Good. I feel like I blabbered a lot, but hopefully it still made sense.
That's what I was referencing or alluding to before, that usually after an interview like this where it was all improv, it's very normal to feel a little like a vulnerability hangover and to feel like, oh my God, what did I just say? I feel it myself, and so because I do one every week, I recognize the feeling, and we talked about like sensitive things, not just in general, but also about you and your life and your journey.
Yeah.
I can just say that I thought it was fire.
Oh,
it was amazing. You didn't feel like you were rambling. You didn't feel like you were, I was like, where's she going? It felt very clear, concise, passionate.
Okay, good.
I love how you would flow from we'd be joking to then you'd be talking to the camera like, listen, motherfucker.
Yeah.
And then
I get really into it. Yeah, I get super into it when once you get the camera going, I'm like, all right, let's do this. So... yeah.
And you actually got me to answer questions.
Yeah.
I normally am like, actually, let me reframe the next.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, I think it was important for the growth of the conversation.
I thought so too. That's why I went with it.
I appreciate that.
Yeah. So it was really, really good. I'm really excited. I know people are going to love the shit out of this one.
Good. I'm excited. Yeah. I hope I gave enough. I think I did. I think there was a lot of material in there.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
And other guests I've had on, I've really had to walk them to the edge of, please say this. So you gave excellent content on consent.
Yeah, there were certain questions where I was like, I don't know if I'm getting to the point that the one that was about kind of, I guess, rape culture.
Yeah.
Was that the answer you were looking for, or was there a particular kind of answer?
Yeah, rape culture, just saying sexism, misogyny, patriarchy.
Yeah.
But people got it.
Okay, cool.
That it's a system.
Yeah.
That perpetuates itself.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Duh. These things are so normalized sometimes that it's I forget that these words are things that I need to say out loud.
That's what I mean. And that's why I was saying, we know.
Yeah.
And the majority of the audience will know.
Which one is he talking about? Okay,
but we got to it that it's not an accidental thing.
Yes. Yeah, it's a learned systemic issue. Yeah.
That just happens.
Yeah.
That what I was saying, that I would become an adult and maybe a father, definitely a mentor and a boss. And 16-year-old Tom as a CEO of a nonprofit with a podcast, that stage and power, I would have continued to amplify that bullshit.
Yeah. And it still gets amplified for a lot of other people, you know, so...
Because there's been no intervention.
Yeah. This is so good. I'm excited to see it.
Me too.
Yeah. And then you're going to cut out parts of it, right? Like to make it shorter? Is it going to be the whole thing?
The only part I'm going to cut out is when we waved.
Okay. Yeah. That's fine. When did you wave? Oh, the website?
Yeah.
Okay.
Otherwise, I'm going to leave the whole thing.
Okay. I was trying to think. There was one part where I was like, this is not coming out right.
I think it was at the end when you were talking about the witnesses.
Yes! And I was like, damn it, I opened the door and I'm not ready
Okay, I was thinking about editing that, but I didn't want you to feel self-conscious.
No, please edit it out. Because I actually feel like I said it completely wrong. That's not what I meant. And then I was like, I don't know how to come back from this.
Okay.
So if you can edit out that portion.
That's what I was thinking too.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I felt everything was
Everything
on
else was out. Yeah.
Okay.
Everything else was fine, I think.
Cool.
Okay.
We were both in the same boat. Because I too was like, where are you going with this? That's the only time I felt that.
Yeah, I was going in a direction where I was like going into scripture and I was like, I don't have enough time for this. So then I stopped halfway.
Abort mission.
Yeah, I stopped halfway. And it was also something new that I learned, and I was like, I actually don't know enough about this.
Okay.
So I don't know if I should go into it, but I had already started.
Because you were saying how for someone to accuse someone of rape, there has to be 4 witnesses.
No, it's not not of rape.
Okay.
And that's the thing.
That's what I was confused about.
So it's not for rape. It's for when 2 consenting adults engage in sexual activity, and it's outside of the context of marriage. They need that instance. You need 4 witnesses. For cases of rape, you do not need that same burden of proof.
Can you explain it one more time?
Okay, so 2 consenting adults engaging in sexual activity outside of the context of marriage.
Yeah.
So it's considered zina.
Okay, which means?
Adultery.
Okay.
You need 4 consenting adults, 4 adults to have witnessed the act of penetration in order for that to be tried in a court.
So like porn.
Like
Y'all would have had to have made porn or
yeah.
been in an orgy.
Yeah, right. Those are maybe the only 2 cases, right? No, but I mean, if there's like somebody's making an accusation against someone of adultery and they want to put it to trial in an Islamic court, they need 4 witnesses to have seen the act of penetration for it to go to a court. Okay, and that's because it's supposed to be such a high burden of proof because these aren't supposed to be things that are tried in a public court. So there's supposed to be stuff that is personal and protected. It's not supposed to be a spectacle for the entire community to then judge on, which is what would have been great to say on camera. But I was like, but also I don't think we should go there because it could also be misinterpreted. So
because it kind of sounds like a sexist law anyway.
It is, yeah. I mean,
like who cares if people have sex?
Exactly, right? Like it's supposed to be that like. Who cares if people have sex outside of marriage? But it's oftentimes misused to say we should be caring about this. Okay. Right?
To uphold patriarchy.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And also police people with how they practice what they practice. So, but that same rule gets misused to say the burden of proof is that you need 4 people, 4 witnesses for
to be innocent. Oh, to be rape. Oh my gosh.
For cases of rape. And so people use that when people come forward with their allegations of sexual assault to say, well, where are your 4 witnesses? Wow. And you do not need the same burden of proof because it's not 2 consenting adults. It's a different category altogether. Wow. So that's where I was going, but it was very hard to articulate. But we can, that's just for you to know.
Do you want to use what we just said in its place?
Did you record it? Mm-hmm. Oh my god! You're so smart! Oh god, you're so smart. I don't know, what do you think?
I'll try to edit it and see what it looks like.
Because I feel like it's a bit specific. I don't know if I don't want people to take any part of it and then misuse it. Okay. So see how it comes out in the edit. Okay. But I think it is a very powerful thing to mention about how oftentimes texts get misused, right? And people can take texts and abuse them and misuse them to promote patriarchy, to promote sexism within the community. And if we're not conscious about how that's being played out, we can fall into that as well. We need to be extra special and extra conscious about how we're protecting survivors, how we're protecting those who are in vulnerable positions, and prioritizing them in terms of what we're doing for the community.
And I think it's like you were saying earlier that there's still some things we're going to hear that haven't yet been critiqued that are going to sit weird like this one.
Yes.
And so we'll all keep working on it because the interpretation of the Quran and of everything to do with Islam has been for generations handed down by, sexist men.
Yes. Yeah.
Whether intentionally or unintentionally. And so we're all, it's kind of like...
Because they're functioning in that system, right? So the person itself, okay, whatever, but it's also because they're a product of a system. Yeah.
So who knows if that's actually what it was when it came out of the Prophet, peace be upon his mouth, or that if that's actually the translation of that Arabic text.
Yeah.
And so I like how you said the compass is Islam was meant to liberate and connect you with God. So if it's not doing that, that dissonance is a good indication to us that something went wrong along the way in the interpretation of it.
Absolutely.
And it's a living, breathing thing.
Yeah.
So we're going to keep
evolving.
using it. Yeah. That's why for me when people are like, well, where in the Quran does it say that like homophobia is, that like homosexuality is not a sin, or that women can have sex outside, all these things. I'm like, I don't really even need that. Yeah. Because I know that it's truth in terms of a world free from discrimination.
Yeah.
And so if it's truth in that, I just know it meshes with Islam without even me having to like go to a dissertation in front of a panel of my peers and be like, see? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and I think this has become, I see it more in the United States. Because I think in other parts of the world where I've seen Islam be practiced, there is an acceptance of diversity also, right? Like nobody has to believe in the same exact thing that you believe in also. And why is it that we have to constantly prove our Islam to everybody else, right? Me saying I'm Muslim should be enough for you. But like this, I think that the norm should be that we are not a monolith and that there is diversity in practice and thought and in how people identify as Muslim.
Do you think it's because of Islamophobia and we're a minority that we feel so pressured to have a one message kind of a thing?
That could be a big part of it. With any issue, right? Like, even when it comes to sexual violence, people are like, don't talk about this because people already hate Muslims and they're going to hate them more if we let them know that there's sexual violence. And I'm like, no. This is going to make us look good. Yeah. Because if we show that we tackle this, that we have zero tolerance, that we're shifting the culture, like that's something that is powerful, a powerful tool against Islamophobia. Similarly, if we say that we are not a monolith and that we are diverse in terms of practice and thought and community, then people can't put Islam into a box because it isn't. It's not in a box. So people can't, it is a tool against Islamophobia in my mind. But to express that to the entire community will be very difficult.
Do you think that, because you've worked in a Muslim majority country doing this kind of work?
So Singapore is not a Muslim majority country, but it is 20% Muslim. So there is a large minority of folks who are Muslim identified, but they're still considered a minority and they're actually discriminated against heavily because they're Muslim.
What, in your bio, wasn't it saying you were doing it in like Malaysia and stuff like that too, though?
The project is a regional project and it's Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia. I was based in Singapore. So my main work was around Singapore, but we worked in partnership with folks in Malaysia and in Indonesia.
And those are
Muslim majority countries, yeah.
Did you find, because I think sometimes we think here in the States that we're the leaders of feminist thought.
Oh no, God, we're so far behind. So far behind. Think about it. I grew up, my entire life was in the United States, and it wasn't until I had that rebirth and awakening and coming home that I was in Singapore. And that's because I had access to scholarship in a way that I didn't have access to in the United States. And I think things have shifted since I moved back, and I've noticed that there is more openness about issues that I wish I could have talked about when I was growing up. But generally speaking, I do not believe that when it comes to feminist theology, that we are leaders as American Muslims. So, but I also just think that's because we have internalized that we're the leaders of everything. That people think that if it hasn't happened here, it hasn't happened anywhere. And that's not true.
Can I ask you another question,
sure.
or do we need to?
No.
Okay, so a lot of what we're having conversations about within feminism is white feminism.
Oh God! So, if you ask me who my least favorite people are, it's white feminists. Yeah.
So what's the nuance or the clarity that you're bringing as a woman of color and a Muslim feminist?
Yeah, so
And am I putting that word on you, feminist, or
no.
Okay.
I very strongly identify with being a feminist. And I wish, honestly, I wish I could just say I'm Muslim and people know that I'm a feminist.
Hey,
right?
I'm down with that.
Yeah, but unfortunately, that isn't the case. Because people make you choose for some reason. But I mean, no, I definitely am a feminist, and I strongly identify with being a feminist. And so I don't know if you've heard of the term reproductive justice.
I have.
Okay,
But
so
let's pretend that people are
okay,
listening.
so so Heart as an organization has taken on this new identifier of being a reproductive justice organization, and in that, it's a rejection of white feminism, and it's an acceptance of the fact that the work we do is intersectional. So we're not just working for sexual and reproductive rights, we're working also against racism and against these larger systems that interact with the way we live our lives as folks who need to also have reproductive and sexual rights. So reproductive justice is a term that was coined by an organization called Sister Song, which was led by Black women who basically rejected this idea that if we're working for sexual and reproductive rights, such as like abortion rights, that it's in a vacuum and that it's not interacting with the way we live our lives as women of color. So I strongly identify with the reproductive justice movement versus it being just about like white feminist kind of in a vacuum, this kind of like I need to just have this kind of right. So yeah, and as a Muslim we're not a Muslim organization, but we're a Muslim-led organization. So to clarify, it's like a very small change of like we're not actually, I don't even know what the difference is. I'm gonna say you can edit this out. Because some people are like, oh, well, you don't have scholars, and so blah, blah, blah. And we're like, whatever.
Haters.
Yeah, they're haters. They're trying to control the Muslim community. Okay, so what I was saying, I don't remember.
I think a good example that I've seen was someone was saying they were in class, and we're talking about sexual freedom and sexuality, things we're talking about. And how, like, someone was coming from a white feminist thought was trying to say that, like, go ahead.
Okay. So, in the reproductive justice movement, it's also important to understand and make space for folks who come from a faith-based background, right? So, oftentimes in kind of spaces where we're talking about sex or sexual freedom, abstinence only until marriage is seen as something that is restricting sexual freedom, right? But if it is my choice to practice that as someone who is informed by my faith tradition or by my faith values, that should still be seen as legitimate and within the spectrum of practicing my sexual freedom, right? And so that is something that we're trying to make a shift around also, is that, again, at the core of it is whether you're making an informed choice and whether it is your individual choice. And whether you choose to, have sex before or after, or whether you never even get married, right? That should be up to you. But all choices should be accepted when it comes to understanding the spectrum of sexual freedom.
And then could you add on within that same conversation associating like the amount of skin you show with your liberation?
Oh God, yes. So, I don't know the number of times I have had to explain myself for the choices I make with how I dress, whether it be wearing my hijab or wearing my headscarf, or why I wear long sleeves, or whether I get hot in there, or whether that's my personal choice, both from white women as well as my white males. But it's seen as like a restriction of my freedom and a restriction of my rights to choose to dress the way I want to. So again, at the core of it is like, if you're not actually respecting the choices that people make to live their lives the way they want to live them, you need to check yourself.
Boom.
Right? So I don't believe in that kind of feminism where we believe it's okay to police women or individuals and dictate how they should dress, how they should live their lives in any way, shape, or form. For me, my feminism must be intersectional, and it must be linked and address and challenge all of the systems that are impacting us, because we are not living single issue lives. So, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I just want to add, so if you're listening to this and I'm white and I'm a feminist, so we're not saying just because you're those two things, but it's more a thought process. So there's a lot of times where what you just said, for some people might be like, oh my God, I never thought of it like that. And instead of experiencing it as shame, where we're saying you're a bad person, see it as an opportunity for self-awareness. Because there's been so many times where when I was engaging in this and getting excited about feminism, where I would hear you say that and be like, oh my God, I messed up. Like, you're right. You know what I mean? And so instead of having to defend and turn it into, I'm a bad person, it's like, here's an opportunity to accept, correct, and move on. And so I just encourage, if you're having some emotions come up around feedback you're getting from the awesome words you said, to look at it as that. It's an opportunity to never have to make that mistake again.
Yeah.
So.
And I mean, I think it's also important, like, I tend to go into a zone and use a particular tone. When I talk about these issues, it's because it's coming from my lived experience. So hopefully I ask that you honor that and not take it as if I'm yelling at you, but I'm yelling at, kind of expressing the frustrations that I've had with regards to my lived experience.
True. And I don't think, though, that you have to tone police that, like, the passion that you brought, and we have to manage other people's emotions.
Yeah.
That if you're feeling uncomfortable, it's okay, because the difference between guilt and shame. Guilt, you're seeing that you have a standard, that you want to be a feminist, you want to create a world free from discrimination, but some of your behavior, without you realizing it, doesn't match up to that. That's guilt, that's fine, but then you get the opportunity then to change it. But shame is where you then associate it with, I'm a bad person. Rather than I might have made a mistake, I'm the mistake. I'm no longer, worthy, especially when we equate our activism with our worthiness. Because you're gonna mess up in activism.
Yeah.
Trust me, as a white guy, I put my foot in my mouth, or whatever the phrase is, all the time. And I have those feelings of like, oh my gosh, and then I just walk myself through the steps that it's not me, I'm not a mistake, it's I made a mistake.
Yeah.
And if somebody no longer wants to love me because I messed up on that, then it's not on me, but I'm not going to make the mistake again, so it's no longer a barrier to love.
Okay, can I add one more thing? Okay, because I know, okay, this is the last thing, I promise. Another thing that we've been thinking a lot about in the reproductive justice field, and just in general when it comes to understanding gender-based violence, is also practicing rahma with those who have harmed us. So when it comes to those who have actually been violent and have brought us a lot of pain and harm, and have acted from a place of practicing rape culture, I don't personally believe it's effective to just label someone as something and then leave it at that, right? I think that there's also a responsibility on all ends. One is that they need to be held accountable, right? So accountability is still a part of this, don't get me wrong. But another part of it is like, how do we then bring you back into the community? And accountability also looks like, taking ownership for the harm, but then also changing behavior.
Yes.
So we hope that also, as you're kind of processing and going through all of this, learning and growing, that we also think about how do we bring people in versus just calling out and then leaving them out there. So, we're a small community, and I feel like it's hard to do that without also creating spaces for growth for those who have harmed. So
I'm hearing you say, do you believe redemption is possible?
I do believe redemption is possible, but I don't believe it's easy. I don't think it's going to happen overnight. And I think that if somebody wants to have a space back in the community, they will need to put in a lot of work. And we're ready to help you walk through that process, but you need to be ready to put in the work as well. So, yeah.
And I think it's disassociating that we're so used to a punitive justice system where you make a mistake, you should therefore suffer. Whereas what I'm hearing you talk about, some people might call restorative justice.
Yes. I was trying to say it without saying it. But that is what it is. Yeah.
Well, I think we just did a whole second part.
I know, that was great. Okay, cool. Thank you.
What do you think about running this as a bonus either episode or after part where we're like, hey, we sat down and had a conversation, and it ended up being like a half hour. So here it is.
Yeah, that's perfect.
That's cool?
Yeah, because I think it was actually really good.
Yeah, me too.
Okay, cool. I'm down.
All right, that's what it is. You just listened to it. You got to hear us unedited, where we literally sat down and we're debriefing the episode, and we decided, fuck it, let's share it with these cool people.
I hope you enjoy it.
Yes! So let's sign off officially. Be sure to follow, and as always, we're wishing you peace and blessings. That was dope. One more thing. I'd love to continue the conversation. Feel free to join me at tomearl.com/join. Subscribe below, or let's connect on social media. Tom Earl Artist. Thanks again for watching.